Welcome to Cornhole Champions, Iowa Starting Line's weekly podcast where we throw bags at the state's biggest stories. I'm Zachary Oren-Smith. Jennifer Konfrst has spent the last 7 years in the Iowa legislature trying to hold the line. From her vantage point as the first woman to lead House Democrats, she's been at the front lines as Iowa Republican majorities transformed the state. Even recently, fights over eminent domain, school vouchers have all been part of the tough road she has led a Democratic minority through in Des Moines. Today, we're going to talk a little about that work and what lessons we can draw from it. But she's also here because she's running for an even bigger office. Iowa's 3rd Congressional District covers much of the Des Moines Metro, stretching through central and southern Iowa. Places like Ottumwa, Red Oak, and Jefferson. The Windsor Heights Democrat announced in May that she's challenging Republican U.S. Rep. Zach Nunn for the seat. It's one of the most competitive districts in the country, the kind of race that could help determine which party controls the House. That's coming up on Cornhole Champions. Jennifer Konfrst, hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. I wanted to start. You've said that voters across the district told you that they feel unheard by Congressman Nunn. We've written quite a bit about him being one of the representatives not holding town halls in his district. And I wanted to kind of begin at that point of like talking about the disconnect between kind of what's happening in Des Moines and maybe what people aren't hearing about here in the district, stuff that might come up in a town hall. Start there for me, please.
Yeah, as I'm talking to voters out there, certainly they feel unheard by Zach Nunn. As you said, he's not shown up. He's not answering their questions. He'll reply to an email and tell them everything is fine, but he's not really listening to what their concerns are. So the disconnect is clear. He's gone Washington, as my grandpa would have said, right? He's gone to D.C. and just become a D.C. guy. And he stopped listening to Iowans and started listening to his donors and to the president, right down to he was thinking about running for governor and President Trump told him he can't. And so, he's not making decisions based on what Iowans are looking for. And what they're telling me is they're scared and they feel a little frozen. They feel like they can't make life decisions because they don't know what's coming next. So, for example, they're scared, will I still be able to go to my rural hospital? Will it stay open or will it close because of cuts to Medicaid? Will I be able to get, maternal health care if I decide to have another baby? But then things like, I don't know if I want to change jobs because I don't know what my health insurance will be like, or I don't want to move because I don't know if that school district will stay open, right? So people feel frozen. And I think that's really one of the biggest things that I've noticed as I've been out there talking to folks.
You mentioned the Notice story, where some reporting that suggested that Zach Nunn had planned to run for governor, and then after a meeting with Donald Trump, he was told in no uncertain terms that he needed to go back to his district and run for that very, very competitive seat, the one that you're running for, you're in the primary for, and part of the reason that this seat is so important, like I said in the intro, is the margins are very tight within the House of Representatives. This is one of the few seats that are going to be in play in the entire country, right? And so when we talk about the stakes of this race, we're talking about the next, the extent to which we have. We're talking about the largest possible policy outcomes, right? Where right now they're in this big fight. Democrats are kind of in this fight to try to maintain the premiums for subsidies for the ACA that have helped open up access to healthcare for so many people across the nation. Tell me about what, I don't know, speak maybe to the stakes of this seat. I think that's an important thing. Most people don't follow electoral politics as closely as you or I. And I'm curious, how do you explain that to folks that may not be paying attention to this seat in that way?
Yeah, I think that, Iowans like balance. As we've talked about a lot, you've talked about it on the podcast. This is the state that once elected Tom Harkin and Chuck Grassley. Right. Iowans like it when things are balanced. And I think things have gotten a little off balance. So I talk with them about how this is one of the seats that when it flips, it will help decide control of Congress. And then there will be a check on the administration. There will be somebody out there holding the president accountable. There will be somebody doing more than just saying yes to everything the president says, right? There's some sort of a check or accountability measure. And I think that's what people are looking for, is they feel like things are a little out of control and they want someone. It's not that we're going to be able to go and fix DC right away. It's that, if we can have a check to the president, we can actually provide some accountability. We can actually ensure that instead of making donors happy, we're actually serving our constituents a little better. So I try to talk with him about balance a lot.
And balance is an interesting kind of piece here, right? When we talk about the kind of more extreme pieces of our politics. Last Friday, you held a press conference talking about the kind of entrance of the Susan B. Anthony list in this race. Do you want to tell me a little bit about who this group is and kind of what they said about Nunn's campaign?
Yeah, there's a group of people. This is an organization of anti-abortion organization that is concerned, rightfully so, that Zach Nunn could lose this seat, and they find him to be a champion for their issue and somebody who has led on the fight of taking away women's reproductive freedom. Of course, those are my words, not theirs. But they're sending in a bunch of activists into the state now to start knocking on doors and telling voters how great Zach Nunn is when it comes to taking away reproductive freedom. We think it's important that people recognize, when we say this seat is up for grabs, this is proof. Republicans are nervous about holding this seat. That's why Zach Nunn wanted to run away, but also why they're sending in activists to try to help him. And secondarily, that this highlights an issue that's still really important to a lot of Iowans, which is that he has voted time and again to take away not just reproductive health care, but health care from Iowans generally. So we think it's important that when they tout what a great voice he is for anti-choice policies, that we remind Iowans, because that's not where Iowans are when it comes to the issue of reproductive freedom. So it's just another example of, one, how scared they are, and two, how out of touch they are with what Iowans are looking for.
In talking about Zach Nunn's an interesting one because I think he self-conceives and very much think when he's talking about kind of like what is his worldview, how he thinks about policy, like he uses the word centrist a lot, right? He thinks about kind of himself. He fashions himself as someone who is looking for good governance, who's looking to try to like kind of walk that middle path, right, for of policy. Do you buy that kind of framework for him?
I mean, of course I don't, right? I mean, he's voted with Donald Trump 100% of the time. And so you can't be a moderate if you're voting with the president 100% of the time. I mean, if it were a Democratic president, I would hope that I'm independent enough to listen to my district. And I bet my president's not right 100% of the time, but he isn't even pausing. He's just voting lockstep with Donald Trump. And that's what Iowans are telling him not to do. And he's not listening. So he fancies himself a centrist. He likes to talk about how he's a centrist. Listen to what he does, not what he says. And at the end of the day, that's the kind of thing Iowans are so frustrated with, right? They just want somebody who's going to be transparent, straightforward, and authentic with them. And Zach Nunn's words don't match his actions. And I think that's what Iowans are pretty tired of when it comes to politicians.
One of the two of the programs that he will often mention as programs that he supports, programs that he would want to protect, are Medicaid and Social Security, right? He's introduced resolutions that would, that he claims would defend these programs and their kind of future in the country. But he was also part of the group that voted for the budget bill that does include cuts for Medicaid and for SNAP benefits for thousands benefits that are the safety net for thousands of Iowans. I just want to be clear here. Like, how would you have handled this differently?
Well, I think that, I would have voted against this bill. This is not a bill that has Iowans' interests in mind. And you can introduce a resolution all you want. That doesn't have the force of law like the bill you voted for that does cut Medicaid benefits and SNAP benefits for so many Iowans. As you said, thousands of them, 37 or 27,000 in this district alone, 100,000 in the state. So, I mean, the impact here is real. And again, it's another example of what he says versus what he does. He says, I care about Medicaid and Social Security, but he doesn't do anything to really help them. What he does instead is vote with the president on bills that will make it worse. So you can say it all you want, sir, but it's not true. And your record shows it.
I want to switch a little bit to agriculture. Iowa farmers have been, dealing with a lot under the Trump administration's first year. Trump tariffs have rattled export markets. Fertilizer costs are high. Commodity prices have been low for about 3 years running. During the last trade war, the government sent billions in bailout payments to farmers instead of fixing those trade relationships that these export markets depend on. Right now, there's been a lot of talk recently about how we're propping up competitors like Argentina that are taking an even greater share of that kind of total market share of places like China from U.S. and Iowa exporters. In your mind, like what should Congress be pushing for? What is the right voice, right direction for U.S. agriculture?
well, first and foremost, we could use a farm bill, right? We haven't had a farm bill in years, and that would help define a lot of policy. But what I'm hearing over and over again from farmers, and I've met with a lot of farmers, there are 21 counties in this district. I've been to them all more than once. And I got to tell you, they're telling me, I want sales, not subsidies. So their biggest concern is not, how are we going to, what kind of subsidies can I get? They want to do their business, do it right, and have markets open to them. And so they're frustrated that, as you said, input costs are so high, prices are low. They're looking at storing corn over the winter. They can't sell their beans because of Brazil, another competitor that we're propping up. So we see a lot of concerns here with these tariffs and a real disconnect between what Zach Nunn has voted for and what they're needing from him in order to have their business run. One of the most powerful things so far has been talking to farmers in this business. My mom grew up on a farm outside of Jefferson, and so she knows old farming, but talking to people now, they are feeling incredibly frustrated because they just want to do their job. They just want to run their business. And they feel like the inconsistency and the chaos of the tariffs have made it really hard for them to plan. A farmer said to me, I get 40 shots at this in my lifetime. 40 shots for 40 years at getting my crops right. And I've done everything right. And because of something that the president and Zach Nunn did in the middle of the planting season, in the middle of the growing season, I now have a different market than I did at the beginning of the year. And that's not fair. And I think that's a really sort of cuts right through, right, to exactly what their experience has been like.
I wanted to turn now to the kind of your experience in the Iowa legislature. Nationally, there's been a lot of ink spilled about kind of what Democrats in the minority, like what does an effective minority voice look like? How does a party that is out of power exercise power, right? Like, what does that look like? What does an effective minority look like? And you've had like I said in the intro, a pretty tough road in the Iowa House is trying to wrangle Democrats and try to push back from some of the some huge changes Iowa Republicans have made in the state in the last couple of years. I wondered if you tell me a little bit about how you would frame what a adequate or effective opposition looks like. What did you see? What have you learned, I guess, in the chamber?
I think that's one of the things that really is helping me be ready for this congressional work is that, I have had to negotiate with Republicans. I have had to look at issues across the aisle and see how we can make bad bills better, how we can stop bad bills, and then how we can work together to get good things done for Iowans. We've been able to stop bills on the floor of the House, stop them from being picked up in the Senate because of the hell we raised. We were able to fix a child labor bill and still vote against it. So I think the way that you demonstrate success in the minority is by touting and profiling and pointing out your policy victories. And sometimes those victories mean something doesn't pass, which none of us got into this work so that we could have something not go through. But at the end of the day, if we can show Iowans, you're welcome. We worked hard to make sure that this ban on in vitro fertilization essentially wouldn't make it over to the Senate. That's the way to get it done. It's also important that we stand up and raise concerns about legislation on the floor. And I'm really proud that our caucus did that during my time as leader, to stand up, point out the problems with legislation, and sometimes even get that legislation pulled while we were in debate. Mm-hmm. So it's not enough just to stand up and complain. You got to try to affect the legislation. And I'm really proud that I've had bills pass, even in the minority, and we've also stopped some really bad stuff.
My employer, Iowa Starting Line, we really, if there's like an expressed value that we have, it's that we really want Iowans involved in their politics. We really want them participating. It's why we publish to the platforms that we do. It's why we approach the work with the voice that we do. And I find that the explanation you gave can be really debilitating, I think, to some folks in politics who might otherwise be in politics. The idea that we're trying to it's this war of fruition that we're constantly having to play. I want you to push if that's right. I'd love to hear more about that. But push back. I mean, do you think in those terms, right, about kind of the future of Iowa politics, participation in Iowa politics?
I mean, this, to me, that message, the fact that we were able to get things done, even in the minority, the fact that we were able to affect change, even in the minority, is what gives me the hope that things can get done and can get better when you have the bully pulpit, when you have the majority, right? So the ability to legislate, it's not just about elections, right? It's about what do you do when you get there? And so the work here is really important. And the fact that we have things to show for it. I have constituents whose lives are better because of work that I helped negotiate in the legislature. That's why you get into this work, right? I'm driving along I-80 and someone says, oh, there's a childcare center that Cindy Axney got funding for that is now open. And I said, can you imagine what it must feel like to go to bed at night knowing because of me, families have safe, affordable childcare? That's what this is all about. And so I feel like it gives us opportunity, shows us hope. We certainly have to understand that politics is the art of the possible. And there are times when you can't get the big win. But if you don't fight for little wins along the way, you get frustrated. So you have to be able to define success in big terms and then in smaller terms to kind of keep you going and keep you having hope.
How would you, I mean, and again, this is sort of like speaking to this, like what does an effective opposition look like? How do you work to define success, right? Like, what does that look like? How does that, particularly when, so I think like oftentimes the framing that I keep hearing from national media that unfortunately I internalize, right, is that there are no, it is always the lesser of two evils, right? That is the kind of state of politics at the moment. It's like, so it's no wonder that my friends don't want to participate in local elections, don't want to run for office, don't want to pay attention to the news. How do you kind of thread through that? How do you thread that needle given the difficulty of kind of that ask?
I think some of what we've done too much is just assume that people will continue to go along with that because we're better than the other guy. We have to start showing why we're the ones that will actually listen and respond. And that's why it's so important that you're out there listening to folks all across the district, because if you don't, you're just going to play politics. And so when you can tell people, I get it, I understand why you hate politics. When I was leader, we did research and it shows that Iowans hate Republicans and Democrats. They just hate Democrats a little more right now. But at the end of the day, they hate politics. And so if you can cut through it and say, I understand why you hate politics, but let's talk about what the work that's happening in Washington is doing to affect your daily life and how it could be better. That's where I think you can find the line. And that's where I think you can thread the needle, is speaking to somebody directly about their values, their issues, and how you can translate those into policy decisions. It's if I go out there and I talk about the Trump tariffs, people are, that seems political. That seems tough. If I talk about tariffs that are, the chaos that's causing them trouble in their business, well, now they're willing to have a conversation because we're talking about the issue they care about, not the politics around it. Stop treating politics like a game and remember that it's real work that's important. I think if we can do that, we can really make some strides.
Yeah, not treating it like a game feels like, that is, excuse the metaphor, that is the ball game, is not treating it like it's a ball game. Kind of bringing us to a close here, is there something about, I kind of want to give you kind of a little bit of time here just to tell me something about your district that people may not know, something that you think is really important, something that you think is really wonderful, just like something that you're, a reason why you're really excited to be running for this particular seat.
So I have a lot of hope about this district. We have a district that has really, really big wealth and a lot of poverty in the same congressional district, right? So folks are all over the map when it comes to their socioeconomic background. But one thing they have in common is that they're frustrated and they're hurting. But let me tell you about Hedgie's in Bedford, Iowa, is what gives me hope. So in Bedford, which is way down south, there's an independent bookstore that that they've opened up on the town square. A family they're not from Bedford. They were just moving into Iowa and trying to find a place to live. They settled in Bedford and opened Hedgie's, an independent bookstore that also sells Iowa wine. And it sounds like throughout all the things that have happened, Hedgie's is not one of those things that's going to stay open, right? When the owner started the business, her husband said, I hope you enjoy it. It will stay open 6 months. They're celebrating their 10-year anniversary. And that is because there is hope in small towns that you can have new businesses. If you listen to people, business can grow. Opportunities are there. They're everywhere if people are just willing to take the chance. And I think Hedgie's, for me, I did spend a lot of money there. I'm going to be honest with you. Hedgie's, for me, is an example of the hope that's out there in these counties, because good things can happen if people stand up and take a risk.
That was Jennifer Konfrst. Jennifer Konfrst is running in the Democratic primary for Iowa's 3rd Congressional District. That was another episode of Cornhole Champions. If you have questions, please send them to zach@iowastartingline.com and be sure to include where in the state you're writing from. We're an audio medium, so send us a voice memo if you're brave. Keep questions to under 90 seconds, and we'd love to hear from you. While you can watch Cornhole Champions wherever you listen to podcasts, the best place to subscribe is to our YouTube. That's youtube.com/Iowa Starting Line. Like and subscribe to help us grow this platform. The best place to follow my work and every twist and turn of this show is my Substack newsletter. Give me a follow at cornholechampions.substack.com. We are on Instagram and TikTok with clips from this show and with videos thinking through the stories we're covering every day. Give us a follow if you like the show. I think you'll like what you find there. Last, Iowa Starting Line's flagship newsletter is a tremendous resource of Iowa news and politics. Subscribe to it at iowastartingline.com/newsletter. I don't think you'll be sorry. Cornhole Champions is a weekly podcast powered by Iowa Starting Line. This podcast was produced by me and edited by Rebecca Steinberg. Our music is by Avery Mossman, and our show art is from Desiree Tapia. Cornhole Champions is a proud member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative. We'll see you with a new episode next Wednesday. Until then, I'm Zachary Oren Smith. Thanks for watching.